In the mountains of Appalachia. In the Appalachian coal town of Paynes Creek, there was a procession on the second Sunday of every May. Dressed in white robes like ancient druids, the mayor and the Protestant clergymen led 3 bulls, garlands hanging from their necks, down the town's main street and up into the mountains. There, rumor had it, they were offered to the Owl Man, who, if not appeased, would wreak havoc on the small West Virginia town. My dad never believed the legends of the Owl Man. He called it a pagan superstition, and whenever the procession would pass our cramped third-story apartment, he would cross himself and utter a prayer. A native of Calabria in southern Italy, he was a devout Catholic. Every morning, before his shift in the mines, he attended mass, and every night he prayed the rosary. My father and the other immigrants brought in to work the mines may not have believed in the Owl Man, but much of the town, the descendants of the Scotch, Irish and German settlers who had inhabited the mountains and hollers around Paynes Creek since the early 1700s, did. And they knew what would happen if the Owl Man was not appeased. In 1921, 3 years before I was born, the new bridge over the Monongahela River collapsed one summer morning, sending 117 souls on a passenger train bound to Cleveland to their doom. Some blamed the engineering firm for the disaster, but many of the townspeople blamed the Owl Man, claiming he was upset at the scrawny bulls offered to him that past May. When I was 10, the procession only had 2 bulls. For this was during the Great Depression, and times were tough in our little town. My dad laughed, saying that it appeared that the townspeople were slowly gaining some sense. The next morning, for the first time ever, the bulls returned from the mountains alone, their garlands gone. Deep scratches, like those from an owl's talon, ran down their backs. Many in the town were hysterical, screaming that the Owl Man would soon have his vengeance, but my father just laughed at the local superstitions. It was the last day of school before summer break when disaster struck. I remember staring at the clock, counting down the minutes till freedom, when I heard several loud bangs. I looked out the window and saw thick black smoke rising from the mine 2 miles in the distance. I, and most of my fellow classmates, ran towards the door. Our teacher, Ms. McCune, yelled at us to stop, but we kept running, for nearly every child in the town had relatives who worked in the mines. By the time I arrived at the mine, several hundred people had already gathered outside a hastily erected barricade the police had set up. I remember hearing wailing in several languages: English, Italian, Polish, Slovak, Hungarian, and Ukrainian, as distraught family members cried out for their loved ones. I found my older sister Maria, who was 14. I asked her if she had heard any news about our dad or our 3 older brothers. She shook her head. Over the next several hours, I watched as the rescuers brought dozens of bodies out on stretchers. Some were still alive, most weren't. At the end of that day, a total of 48 bodies had been recovered. None of them were my relatives. Before nightfall, I returned to our apartment to get some blankets for Maria and me. We didn't want to return home in case there was news about our father or brothers. Around the campfire that night, there was talk that the Owl Man was to blame, that he was enraged about being offered only 2 bulls. I knew it was nonsense, and prayed all night for the rescue of my family. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up to the sound of heavy wing beats. Hovering about 50 feet above me was the Owl Man. With a wingspan of over 12 feet, far larger than any of the great horned owls that inhabited the mountains, he blocked out most of the moon. His head was that of an owl, his body human-like, although covered with dark feathers, with sharp talons that reflected the moonlight. As he looked down on me with 2 large orange eyes, I turned over, convinced I was having a nightmare. The next morning, the first body the rescue crews brought out was that of my dad. His body was covered in a white sheet, but I knew immediately it was him. I ran over to the stretcher and yanked the sheet off. His face was almost burnt beyond recognition, his shirt soaked in blood. In his right hand he grasped his beloved rosary beads. I took them and put them around my neck, it was all I had left of him. Over the next few days, hundreds of other bodies were recovered, including those of 2 of my brothers. That of my oldest brother, Giuseppe, was never found. I held out hope, but eventually came to accept he was gone. My mother having died from tuberculosis 4 years earlier, my sister and I, like dozens of others of the town's children, were orphans. We were sent to live at a Catholic orphanage in town. The first day I got there, one of the nuns asked me what my name was. I told her it was Giorgio. She told me that I was in America and that my name from now on would be George. I started crying and she slapped me across my face. The first of many beatings I suffered there. A few weeks after arriving at the orphanage, the mayor came in just before dinner time, dressed in a three-piece black suit with a matching top hat. He said that a wealthy banker from New York City had read about the disaster and wanted to adopt 2 children. He asked us to write our names down and put them in his hat. I wrote my name as neatly as I could, praying that I would get chosen. I didn't want to leave my sister, but I didn't want to live out my childhood in this orphanage with the cruel nuns. The first child to be picked was a 14-year-old boy named Jan. The second was me. I packed up my meager belongings, put the rosary beads around my neck, and said goodbye to Maria, promising her that I would write and that I would try my best to convince the banker to adopt her as well. The mayor put Jan and me in a Cadillac V16, the first time I had ever ridden in a motor car, and drove us to the Methodist Church, the most prestigious church in town, where all of the local politicians, bankers, and mining executives attended. I had never been inside before and was surprised at how plain it was. No stained glass or statuary, just simple whitewashed walls and oaken pews. I was told that the banker would be here to collect us shortly. We were given clean white robes to put on and given some chicken soup and buttermilk biscuits with apple butter to eat. The rations at the orphanage being meager, I devoured it quickly. Almost immediately, I felt sleepy and dozed off. I awoke in the bed of a wagon, tied down, Jan next to me. It was night, the moon full. 3 mules were pulling us towards the mountains. Besides the wagon, I saw the mayor and the other town dignitaries walking besides it, dressed in white robes, chanting some ancient incantation in some foreign guttural tongue. I knew what was happening and tried to struggle, but I was paralyzed, still under the influence of whatever they had drugged me with. We slowly made our way up the dirt path into the mountains. Far off in the distance, I heard what sounded like the hoot of a large owl, and I thought back to my nightmare outside the mine. After what seemed like hours, we arrived at the edge of a rocky ravine. We were untied and dragged off the wagon. I tried to run, but my muscles were still sluggish. The wicked men chanted some prayer in the strange tongue before the mayor pushed Jan, and then me, into the ravine. The fall was about 15 feet down. Thankfully, I managed not to break anything. In the moonlight, I could see that the floor of the ravine was covered in bones. I noticed several large bull skulls, all the flesh having been picked off long ago. I looked at the sides of the ravine. They were steep, but I was sure that once my muscles recovered, I could scale it. It was then I heard the sinister hooting. On the thick bough of a black oak tree sat the owl man, looking ghostly in the moonlight. Jan saw him too and moved to scale the wall. Being much bigger than me, the effects of the drug had worn off him, and he moved rapidly. He was halfway up when the owl man took flight and grabbed him in his enormous talons. He flew off with the screaming boy to the oak tree. I tried to flee, but was unable to move. I watched as the owl man disemboweled Jan with his enormous talons, as he slowly tore off pieces of flesh from the writhing corpse. Eventually, the screams stopped. I tried to will myself to move, but could only take a few languid steps. I heard the owl man take flight, the beats of his wings nearing me, his appetite apparently not sated. I was dead. I used all my energy to remove the rosary beads from my neck. The owl man landed a few feet away from me, standing over 10 feet tall, staring at me with glowing orange eyes the size of dinner saucers. He smelled like rotten meat. I started praying the rosary as my father had taught me. There was nothing else to do. I kept waiting for the owl man to attack me, but he didn't. He stood by me all night, but never took another step closer, as if he was repelled by an invisible force. I never stopped praying. Even when my mouth was dry as dust and I thought I could not utter another word, I somehow found a way, for I knew that if I stopped praying for even a second, the Owlman would get me. At the first rays of dawn, the Owlman finally alighted and flew deeper into the woods. The drug having worn off, I climbed out of the ravine. At the top lay Jan's mutilated body, crawling with maggots. I knew I couldn't go back to town, for if they found out I had survived, they would surely kill me. I had never been up in this far in the mountains and didn't have a good sense of what towns were nearby. I just started walking down a narrow muddy path, heading both away from town and away from where the Owlman flew. It was nearly nightfall when I came out of the mountains into a small farming village. There was a train depot where I went to lay down, hoping to jump on the next train that came by. I was woken up to the kick to the head from a big-bellied sheriff who threatened to send me to the state reformatory if I didn't leave. I ran off, hiding in some nearby fields. Early the next morning, I heard a freight train rolling into town and ran towards the tracks, praying that the sheriff wasn't nearby. As it slowed at the depot, I jumped into one of the open boxcars. After a few hours, the train stopped in Pittsburgh, where I jumped off. I'd never been to a city before and was amazed at the sheer size of it. I begged on the stress for a few days before I was sent to a group home where I resided for the rest of my childhood. When I was 17, I made the journey back to Paynes Creek in search of my sister, confident that no one would recognize me after all these years, not wanting to draw attention to myself by asking about her. I went to the town's tiny library and looked through the old newspapers, trying to find a wedding notice or some other clue to her location. After several hours of searching, I found that she had married a lawyer in Pittsburgh when she was 16, just 2 years after the disaster. I couldn't believe that for all these years, she had just been living a few miles from me. Before I left, I visited the churchyard, nestled in a small clearing near the base of the mountains, and paid respects to my parents and brothers. It was near sunset, and from the mountains I heard loud hooting. That was the last time I ever stepped foot in Paynes Creek. Back in Pittsburgh, I tracked my sister down to a Victorian mansion in the Shadyside neighborhood. A servant answered and told me that there was no work to be found here. I told her that I was Maria's brother, only to be told that all her brothers were dead. I barged into the house and started screaming in Italian for Maria. She came down the stairs wearing just a robe. She stared at me for a few seconds before recognizing me. She hugged me, crying, telling me that she had been told that I had died in an automobile accident. I lied, telling her that the banker who adopted me was a cruel man who beat every day until I ran away. I never told her the truth. She died a few years back, nearly 100, not knowing the reality of what lurked in the mountains. I never told anyone the truth. Until now. I sometimes wonder if the Owlman still lives. My time is running out. Although I am an old man, I can still shoot as well as I could back in my army days when I won medals for my marksmanship. I have a feeling the Owlman waits for me in the mountains of Appalachia, that he wants to get his revenge on the boy who got away. I want my revenge too.